I'm Emma Williams, 31, and I thought I knew what humiliation felt like until my mother called my divorce embarrassing at my cousin's wedding. Standing there in my borrowed dress, watching her whisper to relatives about my failure, I felt smaller than I had in years. The woman who raised me to be independent had somehow decided that leaving an unhappy marriage made me a disappointment. But as I drove home that night, my phone buzzed with a text from Alex, my new partner of 6 months. A simple "How was tonight? You looked beautiful in the photos your aunt posted." That gentle check-in reminded me why I'd found the courage to start over. What my mother didn't know yet was that Alex wasn't just kind and supportive. The financial portfolio I'd glimpsed accidentally would change everything about how she saw my choices and me. If you've ever felt judged for choosing happiness over appearances, you'll understand what happened next. The divorce papers still sat in my kitchen drawer, signed and filed 3 months ago, but somehow still feeling surreal. Every time I glimpsed that manila folder, I remembered my mother's words when I first told her about David and me. Finally, Sarah's making a sensible choice. David had been sensible, I'll give her that. An accountant with a steady income, a reliable Honda Civic, and a 5-year plan that included a suburban house with a white picket fence. At 26, fresh out of college and drowning in student loans, he seemed like the answer to every practical prayer my mother had whispered over my chaotic art student lifestyle. "He's stable," she'd said, nodding approvingly as David outlined his retirement savings strategy over Sunday dinner. "That's what you need, honey. Someone to keep your head out of the clouds." I should have noticed then how her approval felt more like relief than celebration, as if she'd been holding her breath, waiting for me to stop disappointing her with my impractical dreams of making art for a living. The wedding was everything my mother wanted: elegant, traditional, and expensive enough to impress her friends. David's parents contributed generously, and mine matched it with money they couldn't really afford. I wore my grandmother's dress, carried flowers that matched the venue's decor, and smiled through a reception where everyone talked about how perfect we were together. But perfect is a funny word. It suggests something complete, flawless, finished. Our marriage felt finished before it began. David wasn't cruel or abusive. He was just absent, emotionally absent in a way that took me years to recognize because it was so polite, so reasonable. He supported my freelance graphic design work the way he supported his 401k, as a practical necessity that didn't require enthusiasm or interest. "How was your day?" became a ritual without meaning. He'd ask while scrolling through his phone, and I'd answer while loading the dishwasher. And neither of us listened because we both knew the script. Work was fine, dinner was planned, bills were paid, life was proceeding according to schedule. I started staying up later, working on personal art projects that David called hobbies, with the same tone other people reserved for collecting bottle caps. When I sold my first commissioned piece of logo design that paid more than I'd made in months, he congratulated me the way you'd praise a child for cleaning their room, proud but patronizing, as if my success was cute rather than significant. The loneliness crept in slowly, like water through a foundation crack. I'd lie next to him at night, listening to his steady breathing, and wonder when I'd started feeling more alone with him than I'd ever felt by myself. We had conversations about grocery lists and oil changes, but when had we stopped talking about dreams, fears, or anything that mattered? The breaking point came on our 4th anniversary. David surprised me with dinner reservations at the same restaurant where we'd had our first date, same table, same wine, even the same entrees. He was so pleased with his thoughtfulness, and I sat there realizing he'd confused repetition with romance. "We should do this every year," he said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "Make it our tradition." That's when I understood. He didn't want to create new memories with me. He wanted to replay the same safe script forever. No growth, no change, no risk of discovering who we might become if we actually tried. The conversation about separation happened 3 weeks later. David took it well, the way he took everything calmly, practically, with a slight disappointment that this disruption wasn't in his 5-year plan. My mother's reaction was less measured. "You're throwing away everything good in your life," she'd said, her voice sharp with panic. "Do you know how many women would kill for a husband like David?" Maybe they would. But I'd finally realized that wanting to kill for something and wanting to live for it were two entirely different things. The studio apartment lease felt like both a victory and a surrender when I signed it. 450 square feet of independence, with a kitchenette that barely fit a microwave and windows that faced a brick wall. But it was mine, the first space I'd chosen entirely for myself since college. Moving day was humbling. Everything I owned fit into my Honda Civic and my best friend Lisa's SUV in 2 trips. Clothes, a few dishes, my computer setup, and the mattress that had seen better days. David had kept the furniture, the wedding gifts, everything that made a house feel like a home. I told myself I preferred starting fresh, but the truth was, I couldn't afford to replace any of it. "It's cozy," Lisa said diplomatically, setting down a box labeled Sarah's art supplies in what would serve as both living room and office space. "It's what I can afford," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. The first month was harder than I'd expected. Not just financially, though that was certainly a challenge. Freelance graphic design work was unpredictable, and I was essentially starting over with building a client base. David had always handled our finances, leaving me embarrassingly naive about things like credit scores and utility deposits, but the emotional adjustment proved even more difficult than the practical one. I'd forgotten how quiet solitude could be. After years of David's steady presence, even if it was emotionally distant, the apartment felt enormous in its silence. I found myself leaving the television on just for background noise, creating the illusion of companionship. Thought my mother visited exactly once, 3 weeks after I'd moved in. She stood in the doorway, taking in the sparse furnishings and cramped quarters with barely concealed horror. "This is temporary, right?" she asked, her voice tight with concern. "You're not planning to live like this long term." I was sitting cross-legged on my futon laptop balanced on my knees, working on a logo design for a local bakery. The project would pay $300, barely enough to cover groceries for the month, but it was honest work, doing something I actually enjoyed. "I'm building a business, Mom. It takes time." "Sarah, honey, you're 31 years old. You can't live like a college student forever." She gestured around the small space as if it physically pained her. "David called me yesterday. He's willing to talk. You know, work things out." The logo on my screen was starting to take shape, a whimsical design featuring hand-lettered script and delicate flourishes. The bakery owner had specifically requested something that felt warm and homemade, and I could envision exactly how it would look on storefront windows and business cards. "I don't want to work things out with David," I said, not looking up from my screen. "I want to work things out with myself. And what happens when this little graphic design phase doesn't pan out, when you can't make rent?" Her voice carried that familiar edge of panic that appeared whenever my choices didn't align with her vision of security. "Then, I'll figure it out. People do it every day." She stayed for 20 more minutes, making increasingly pointed observations about my situation. The lack of proper furniture, the uncertainty of freelance income, the way I was throwing away everything good for some romantic notion of artistic fulfillment. After she left, I sat in the growing darkness of my small apartment, not bothering to turn on the light. The brick wall outside my window was barely visible, but I could hear the sounds of the city filtering through the thin glass, cars passing, neighbors talking, life continuing all around me. For the first time since the divorce, I felt something unexpected: pride, not in my circumstances, which were admittedly challenging, but in my choice to be here. I was scared, yes. Uncertain about the future, absolutely. But I was also awake in a way I hadn't been for years. I finished the bakery logo that night, working by the glow of my laptop screen until my eyes burned. When I finally emailed the final files to the client, I felt a satisfaction that no steady paycheck had ever provided. This was mine: the late nights, the creative struggles, the small victories, the uncertain future. All of it was finally, authentically mine. The coffee shop receipt is still tucked into my wallet, though the ink has faded to barely legible gray. March 15th. 2:47 p.m., 1 large coffee and a blueberry muffin, $7.32. That changed everything, though I had no way of knowing it at the time. It was raining that afternoon, one of those sudden spring storms that turns umbrellas inside out and sends everyone scrambling for shelter. I'd been walking back from a client meeting that hadn't gone particularly well. The restaurant owner had spent 30 minutes explaining why my logo designs were too artistic and not commercial enough, before asking if I could make something that looked more like McDonald's, but different. By the time I ducked in to grind coffee to escape the downpour, I was soaked, frustrated, and questioning every life choice that had led me to this moment. The place was packed with other rain refugees, Every table occupied except for one small towel sitter near the window where someone had left a newspaper and an empty cup. "Excuse me," I said to the person at the next table, a man with dark hair and kind eyes who was typing on a laptop. "Is anyone sitting here?" He looked up and smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes in a way that caught me off guard. "All yours, though I should warn you, that window leaks a little when the wind picks up." As if summoned by his words, a gust of wind sent raindrops spattering against the glass. We both laughed, and he gestured to the chair across from him. "You're welcome to share my table if you'd rather stay dry. I'm just answering emails, nothing that requires privacy." Something about his easy manner made me accept. Maybe it was the way he cleared space for me without making it seem like a big deal, or how he handed me napkins for my wet hair without commentary about the weather or my appearance. He simply offered help and went back to his laptop, giving me space to settle in. I ordered my coffee and muffin, then pulled out my own laptop to review the notes from my disappointing meeting. The logo mock-ups on my screen felt even more inadequate under the harsh fluorescent lights, and I found myself staring at them with growing frustration. "Design work?" he asked quietly, nodding toward my screen. I looked up, surprised. Most people couldn't identify graphic design from a glance. Logo concepts, though apparently they're too artistic for selling burgers. "Mind if I look? I promise I'm not trying to steal your ideas. I just have a weird fascination with visual branding." There was something refreshing about his curiosity. David had always looked at my work with polite disinterest, the way you might glance at someone else's crossword puzzle. This stranger seemed genuinely intrigued. I turned my laptop slightly so he could see the screen. "The client wants something that says family restaurant but also modern and trustworthy, and about 15 other contradictory things." He studied the designs for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "These are beautiful. The typography, especially it, has this handcrafted feel that would make me want to eat there." What did they not like about them? Too artistic, not commercial enough. They want something that looks like every other chain restaurant logo, which makes me wonder why they hired a designer in the first place. Because they think they want generic, but what they actually want is memorable. These, he tapped gently near my screen, these would be memorable. We talked for the next 2 hours about design, about the challenge of balancing creativity with commercial appeal, about the difference between what clients say they want and what would actually serve their business. He asked thoughtful questions and listened to my answers with an attention that felt rare and valuable. His name was Alex, and he worked in investment consulting, which he described with the same casual dismissiveness most people reserve for saying they worked in insurance. When I asked what kind of investments, he shifted the conversation back to my work, asking about my background and how I'd ended up freelancing. I found myself telling him about the divorce, about starting over, about the challenge of building a business from scratch while my mother called daily to suggest I reconsider my phase. He listened without offering solutions or judgment, just genuine interest in my story. "It must be scary," he said when I paused. "Starting over like that, terrifying," I admitted, "but also exciting in a way I didn't expect, like I'm finally figuring out who I am when I'm not trying to be what someone else needs me to be." The rain had stopped without either of us noticing. Afternoon light filtered through the cleared windows, and the coffee shop had emptied out as people returned to their daily routines. We'd been talking for so long that I'd forgotten about my disappointing meeting, about my financial worries, about everything except this unexpected conversation with a stranger who seemed to see something worthwhile in both my work and my choices. When we finally said goodbye, Alex asked if he could see me again, not in the smooth, practiced way that always made me uncomfortable, but with a genuine uncertainty that suggested my answer actually mattered to him. "I'd like that," I heard myself saying. Walking home, I realized I was smiling for the first time in weeks. The handwritten note arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped under my apartment door sometime before dawn. "Alex's careful script on cream-colored paper. Saw this at the farmer's market and thought you might enjoy it. No pressure to use it, just wanted you to know I was thinking of you. A." Attached was a small packet of lavender seeds and instructions for growing them in containers. Such a simple gesture, but it made me pause in my kitchen doorway, coffee mug halfway to my lips. David had brought me flowers exactly 3 times in 4 years of marriage: Valentine's Day, my birthday, and our anniversary, purchased from the grocery store with the same methodical attention he gave to selecting breakfast cereal. This was different. Alex had remembered a conversation from our third date. When I'd mentioned missing the herb garden I'd kept on my old apartment balcony. He'd noticed something small about me and acted on it, without fanfare or expectation of gratitude. Over the following 6 months, these small attentions became the foundation of something I'd never experienced before. Alex paid attention to details, not just the obvious ones, but the subtle patterns that revealed who I really was. He noticed that I always ordered tea instead of coffee after 6 p.m., that I unconsciously drew tiny flowers in the margins of my notebooks, that I got quiet when I was processing something difficult. Our relationship developed slowly, carefully, like those lavender seeds taking root in the little pots I'd arranged on my fire escape. Alex seemed to understand that I was still recovering from my marriage, still learning to trust my own instincts about relationships. He never pushed for more than I was ready to give, never made me feel guilty for needing space or time. "I'm not going anywhere," he said one evening when I apologized for being too complicated after canceling a date because I'd had a panic attack about my dwindling savings account. "Complicated isn't a flaw, Sarah, it's just human." He showed up in ways that mattered. During my lowest month financially, when I was surviving on ramen and generic cereal while waiting for 3 clients to pay their invoices, Alex brought groceries, not with pity or lectures about my career choices, but framed as preparing dinner together, something he genuinely seemed to enjoy. "I love cooking," he said, "unpacking ingredients for a stir-fry. But it's depressing to cook for one person. You're doing me a favor." I knew he was giving me an out, a way to accept help without feeling like charity. The gesture revealed something important about his character. He understood that preserving my dignity was more important than satisfying his desire to help. Our conversations deepened as the months passed. Alex was surprisingly well-read, able to discuss everything from philosophy to current events with a depth that challenged and engaged me. But he was equally comfortable with comfortable silence, content to read beside me while I worked on design projects, occasionally looking up to share an interesting passage or ask my opinion on something. He never made me feel like my work was a hobby or a phase. When I showed him a particularly challenging logo project, he asked thoughtful questions about color, psychology, and typography choices. When I landed my first major client, a nonprofit that wanted a complete brand identity, Pakachi insisted on celebrating with dinner at a restaurant I'd mentioned wanting to try. "This is a big deal," he said, raising his wine glass. "You should be proud." The physical intimacy developed just as gradually. Alex seemed to understand that rushing would undermine everything we were building. Our first kiss happened after 2 months of dating, soft and tentative and perfect in its timing. When we finally spent the night together, it was after a conversation about what intimacy meant to each of us, what we needed to feel safe and valued. "I want to know you," he said that night, his hands gentle on my skin. "All of you. But only as much as you want to share." It was the opposite of everything I'd known with David, where physical intimacy had become routine and disconnected from emotional closeness. With Alex, every touch felt intentional. Every moment of vulnerability was met with tenderness. My mother, of course, had opinions about Alex based on their brief meeting at that disastrous family dinner. "He seems nice enough," she said during one of our weekly phone calls. "But what does he actually do? This investment consulting thing sounds vague." "He helps people make smart financial decisions," I replied, which was true if incomplete. Alex had mentioned working with small businesses and individual clients, helping them plan for retirement and major purchases. It sounded stable and respectable, though he always seemed more interested in talking about my work than his own. "Well, as long as he can support a family eventually," my mother continued. "You're not getting any younger, Sarah." I changed the subject, unwilling to let her anxiety about my future contaminate something that was growing so beautifully in the present. Alex and I had never discussed marriage or children or any of the conventional relationship milestones my mother considered essential. We were focused on building something real and sustainable, day by day, conversation by conversation. What we had felt precious and fragile, like those lavender seedlings that needed careful tending to flourish. But it also felt stronger than anything I'd built on a foundation of others' expectations. For the first time in my adult life, I was in love with someone who seemed to be falling in love with me, not with who they needed me to be. The investment portfolio statement lay open on Alex's kitchen table, like an accidentally revealed secret. I'd been using his laptop to upload final files for a client. project my ancient computer had finally given up during a crucial deadline when I knocked over my coffee mug. The liquid splashed across the table, soaking into the papers Alex had left scattered from his morning work session. "Oh God, I'm so sorry," I said, grabbing napkins to mop up the mess. Alex was in the shower, and I was frantically trying to save what looked like important documents before the coffee could do permanent damage. That's when I saw the numbers. The portfolio summary was waterlogged, but still legible, and the figures made me stop breathing for a moment. Investment accounts totaling over $4 million, real estate holdings, stock portfolios, a retirement account that contained more money than I'd ever imagined having in my lifetime. I stood there, napkins dripping in my hands, staring at financial statements that revealed Alex as someone completely different from who I'd thought he was. Not just comfortable or successful wealthy, genuinely, substantially wealthy. My first instinct was to look away, to pretend I hadn't seen anything, but the papers were soaked, and I couldn't just leave them to be ruined. I carefully separated the documents, laying them out on the counter to dry, trying not to read any more than necessary while still being helpful. But it was impossible not to notice the patterns: monthly investment contributions that exceeded my annual income, dividend payments that could have covered my rent for a year, property taxes on what must have been a significant real estate portfolio. Alex emerged from the bathroom, hair still damp, wearing the same casual jeans and t-shirt that had made him seem so approachable and normal. I was sitting at his kitchen table, laptop open, trying to look busy with my client work while my mind raced with questions. "Everything okay?" he asked, noticing the papers spread across his counter. "I spilled coffee on your work stuff. I'm sorry, I was trying to save them from getting completely soaked." He glanced at the documents with what seemed like mild annoyance rather than panic. "Thanks. It's just boring financial stuff anyway." Boring financial stuff. $4 million in investments was boring financial stuff. I nodded and went back to my laptop, but I couldn't concentrate on the logo I was supposed to be finalizing. Every interaction with Alex over the past 6 months suddenly took on new meaning. His casual generosity with dinners and groceries, the way he never seemed stressed about money, his vague descriptions of his work as investment consulting. Had he been lying to me? Or just concealing the extent of his success? And if so, why? The questions multiplied as I tried to focus on work. Was our entire relationship built on deception? Had he been slumming it with the struggling artist, amused by my financial worries while sitting on millions? Or was there something more complex happening here? "Sarah." Alex's voice pulled me back to the present. He was standing beside me, looking concerned. "You seem distracted. Is everything okay?" I looked up at him, this man I'd been falling in love with for 6 months, and realized I had no idea how to answer that question. Everything felt okay and completely wrong at the same time. "Just tired," I said. "This project has been draining." He nodded, accepting my explanation without pushing for details. It was one of the things I'd always appreciated about him. He gave me space to process things in my own time. But now I wondered if his emotional intelligence was just another form of privilege, the luxury of patience that came with never having to worry about practical concerns. I finished my work and gathered my things, suddenly needing to be in my own space to think. Alex walked me to the door, kissing me goodbye with the same tenderness he'd shown for months. But I felt like I was kissing a stranger. "Call me later," he asked. "Of course," I replied, though I wasn't sure when I'd feel ready to have that conversation. Walking back to my tiny apartment, I tried to sort through my emotions. Was I angry that he hadn't told me? Hurt that he'd let me struggle financially while he could have helped? Embarrassed that I'd been so transparent about my money worries while he'd been hiding his wealth? Or was I just scared that this changed everything between us? By the time I reached my building, I'd made a decision. I wouldn't confront Alex about what I'd seen. Not yet. I needed time to figure out what it meant for him, for me, for us. I needed to understand whether the man I'd fallen in love with was real, or if I'd been in love with a carefully constructed version of someone who didn't actually exist. The portfolio statement had revealed Alex's net worth, but it had also revealed something else: how little I really knew about the person I'd been building a future with. I started keeping a journal after discovering Alex's wealth, something I hadn't done since college. The act of writing helped me sort through the confusion that had taken root in my chest like a persistent ache. Page after page of questions I couldn't answer, doubts that multiplied in the late night hours when sleep eluded me. Is he with me because I'm safe? I wrote on Tuesday night. Because I'm not after his money since I don't know about it? Or am I just convenient, the struggling artist who makes him feel generous and needed? The questions felt ugly on paper, but they reflected the ugly thoughts that had been circling my mind for days. I'd replayed every interaction we'd had, looking for signs of deception or condescension. The way he'd paid for dinners without discussion, his nonchalant attitude toward expensive wine, the casual ease with which he'd handled my financial crises. Had he been laughing at my money worries, amused by my careful budgeting and second-hand furniture? The thought made my stomach clench with humiliation, but he never made me feel small about any of it. I continued writing, never acted like my struggles were silly or temporary, never suggested I should just let him take care of things. This was the contradiction that kept me awake. If Alex was hiding his wealth to manipulate or deceive me, he was doing it in the kindest possible way. He'd never once made me feel inadequate about my financial situation. If anything, he'd seemed to admire my independence and determination. But maybe that was part of the deception too. I thought about my mother's values, the way she'd raised me to see financial security as the most important consideration in any relationship. Love doesn't pay the bills, she'd said when I'd complained about David's emotional distance. Stability is more important than passion in the long run. Had I unconsciously absorbed that lesson? Was part of my attraction to Alex based on sensing his financial security, even without knowing the extent of it? The thought made me feel sick with self-doubt. I don't want to be the kind of person who cares about money, I wrote, but I also don't want to be naive. How do I know if what we have is real if it's built on concealed information? The rational part of my mind knew I was spiraling. Alex had never actually lied to me. He'd just been vague about the details of his work and finances. Plenty of people were private about money, especially in new relationships. Maybe his discretion was about protecting himself, not deceiving me, but the wounded part of my psyche, still healing from years of feeling unseen in my marriage, couldn't let go of the fear that I was being managed rather than loved. I started paying different attention to our interactions, analyzing his words and gestures for hidden meanings. When he suggested a restaurant that was slightly more expensive than our usual places, was he testing whether I'd noticed the price difference? When he casually mentioned a client meeting in the financial district, was he dropping hints about his real income level? The hypervigilance was exhausting and poisonous. I found myself pulling back emotionally, creating small distances that I told myself were protective, but that felt more like self-sabotage. What if I'm just scared? I wrote after a particularly difficult evening when I'd been cold and distant for no reason Alex could understand. What if I'm looking for reasons to push him away because being truly happy feels too risky? This possibility was almost worse than discovering he'd been deceiving me. At least deception would be his fault. If I was sabotaging something genuine because of my own fears and insecurities, the responsibility would be entirely mine. I thought about the lavender plants on my fire escape, now thriving after months of careful attention. They hadn't grown because I'd analyzed their every leaf or questioned their motives for blooming. They'd grown because I'd provided consistent care and trusted the process. Maybe relationships worked the same way. I need to decide what I actually want. I wrote, do I want to be with Alex because of who he is, or am I looking for reasons to run because being loved feels too good to trust? The journal entry felt like a breakthrough, but it also felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. One could choose to trust what we'd built together, accept that some mystery and gradual revelation were normal parts of getting to know someone, or I could let my fears and insecurities destroy something that might be the most genuine connection I'd ever experienced. But first, I needed to figure out who Alex really was, and whether the version of him I'd fallen in love with was authentic, or just another performance designed to win my trust. The truth was, I was terrified of both possibilities. The family photo from that evening still exists somewhere in my mother's collection, though I've never asked to see it again. We're all arranged around her dining room table, my parents, my sister Jennifer with her husband Mark, and Alex and me. Everyone is smiling, except Alex, who has this slightly bewildered expression that should have been my first clue about how the evening would unfold. So, Alex, my mother began before we'd even finished serving ourselves from the pot roast she'd spent all day preparing. Sarah tells us you work in investments. What kind of investments exactly? I'd warned Alex that my mother could be direct, but I'd underestimated how direct. She had that tone in her voice, the one that suggested she was conducting an interrogation rather than making polite conversation. I help individuals and small businesses make informed decisions about their financial planning. Alex replied diplomatically. Retirement accounts, college savings, that sort of thing. That sounds very general, she continued, cutting her meat with precise, aggressive motions. Do you work for a firm? Have your own practice? I work independently. It gives me more flexibility to focus on my clients' specific needs. My father attempted to redirect the conversation towards safer topics, the weather, local sports teams, anything that didn't involve cross-examining my boyfriend about his career prospects, but my mother was just getting started. Independent work can be so unstable, she said with a meaningful glance in my direction. Sarah knows all about that with her graphic design endeavors. It's nice when people have hobbies, but eventually everyone needs steady income. Sarah's work isn't a hobby, Alex said quietly, but with an edge that made me look up from my plate. She's building a business that takes courage and talent. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. My mother's fork paused halfway to her mouth, and she gave Alex a look that could have frozen water. Of course, it's wonderful that Sarah has creative outlets, she said, emphasizing the word outlets in a way that made it sound trivial. But at some point, practicality has to take precedence. She's not 22 anymore. I think Sarah is exactly where she needs to be, Alex replied, still maintaining his polite tone but with steel underneath it. She's following her passion and building something meaningful. That seems pretty practical to me. Jennifer jumped into the conversation, probably trying to diffuse the tension. How did you two meet? Sarah was pretty mysterious about the details. I was grateful for the subject change, but my relief was short-lived. As Alex and I took turns telling the story of our coffee shop encounter, I watched my mother's expression grow increasingly disapproving. Everything about our relationship seemed to confirm her worst fears: the casual way we'd met, the lack of formal introduction or mutual connections, the fact that we'd been together for 6 months without any discussion of engagement or long-term plans. That's very romantic, Jennifer said when we finished, though her tone suggested she was trying too hard to be supportive. Romance is lovely, my mother said, but it doesn't last. What lasts is compatibility, shared values, similar backgrounds, and goals. The implication was clear. Alex and I had none of those things. In her assessment, we were two irresponsible artists playing at being adults, with no real foundation for a sustainable relationship. What are your goals, Alex? She asked directly. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? It was the same question she'd asked David during their first meeting, and David had impressed her with his detailed 5-year plan, complete with projected salary increases and homeownership timeline. Alex's answer was characteristically different. I'd like to be doing work that matters to me, with people I care about. The details matter less than making sure I'm building something worthwhile. That's very philosophical, my mother replied, in a tone that made philosophy sound like a character defect. But Sarah needs someone who can provide stability, security. She's already been through one failed marriage. The room went silent except for the sound of cutlery against plates. I felt heat flood my face: embarrassment, anger, and something close to grief at seeing my mother reduce my divorce to a personal failure that made me damaged goods. Sarah doesn't need someone to provide for her, Alex said, his voice still controlled but with an intensity that made everyone look up. She's one of the strongest, most capable people I've ever met. She's building a life on her own terms, and that's remarkable. Remarkable doesn't pay rent, my mother shot back. Neither does staying in relationships that make you unhappy, Alex replied. The conversation limped along for another hour, with my father making increasingly desperate attempts at neutral topics while my mother found subtle ways to undermine both Alex and me. She questioned his work ethic, his commitment to the relationship, his ability to be a suitable partner for someone who needed structure in her life. Alex handled it with more grace than I would have managed. He answered her questions honestly, defended me without being confrontational, and tried repeatedly to redirect toward more positive topics. But I could see the toll it was taking: the slight tension in his shoulders, the careful way he chose his words, the occasional glance at me that seemed to ask if this was really what I'd grown up with. When we finally left, Alex was quiet during the drive back to my apartment. I wanted to apologize, to explain that my mother wasn't always so hostile, but I wasn't sure either of those things was true. Your family has strong opinions, he said finally. They think they're protecting me from what? Being happy. I didn't have a good answer for that. We sat in my apartment afterward, Alex reading while I worked on a design project. But the comfortable ease that usually characterized our evenings together had been replaced by something heavier. I'm sorry about tonight, I said eventually. You don't need to apologize for your family, Alex replied. But something in his tone suggested the evening had shifted something between us too. Looking back, I think that dinner was the beginning of the end of our protective bubble. My mother's disapproval had introduced doubt and judgment into something that had been growing organically. Her questions about Alex's suitability had planted seeds that would complicate everything that came after. The printed internet articles arrived in my mailbox 3 days after the disastrous family dinner, forwarded without explanation or return address, but I recognized my mother's handwriting on the envelope immediately, the careful script she'd used for grocery lists and birthday cards throughout my childhood. Inside were 4 pages of search results, printed from various websites and business directories, articles about Alexander Chen, financial consultant, and Chen Investment Solutions, professional headshots from LinkedIn and company websites, a brief mention in a local business journal about successful portfolio management strategies. First, I was confused. These seemed like routine professional profiles, the kind of basic information anyone could find with a simple Google search. Alex worked in investment consulting. He'd never hidden that fact. If anything, the articles confirmed what he'd already told me about his work. But as I read more carefully, I began to understand what had captured my mother's attention. The clients mentioned in the Business Journal article weren't individuals saving for retirement. They were high net worth clients, family foundations, and small corporations. The portfolio values referenced were substantial, not the modest retirement accounts and college funds Alex had described to me. One article mentioned Chen Investment Solutions managing over $50 million in client assets. Another briefly profiled Alex as one of the region's rising stars in wealth management for affluent families. There was a photo of him at a charity gala, wearing a tuxedo and shaking hands with someone the caption identified as a prominent local philanthropist. That I sat at my kitchen table, staring at these papers, feeling like I was reading about a stranger. The Alex in these articles was successful, well-connected, and moving in social circles I'd never imagined. He managed millions of dollars in investments for wealthy clients. He attended charity galas. He was, by any reasonable definition, a member of the financial elite. My phone rang, interrupting my confused inventory of this new information. Did you get my package? My mother's voice was tight with barely contained excitement. You mean the articles you printed out about Alex? I thought you should know who you're really dating. I had a feeling something wasn't adding up about his vague job descriptions. I could hear the satisfaction in her voice, the vindication of her suspicious instincts. Mom, this just confirms what Alex already told me. He works in investment consulting. Sarah, honey, did you read the part about $50 million in client assets? This isn't some small-time financial planner helping people with their 401ks. This is serious money. I scanned the articles again, this time noting the details I'd initially glossed over. The prestigious address of his office building, the mention of exclusive client services, the casual reference to managing family trusts and estate planning for ultra-high net worth individuals. He told me he worked with small businesses and individuals. I said, more to myself than to my mother. Well, apparently those individuals are millionaires. And Sarah, look at that charity gala photo. Look at what he's wearing, who he's standing with. This is not the casual, down-to-earth guy who's been eating takeout in your studio apartment. The implications of her research settled over me like cold water. Alex hadn't lied, exactly. But he'd certainly presented a carefully edited version of his professional life. Investment consulting for small businesses and individuals technically accurate, but missing the crucial detail that those individuals were extremely wealthy. I don't understand why you're upset about this, I said. Though I was beginning to understand my own confusion about it. I thought you wanted me to date someone financially stable. I want you to date someone honest, someone who doesn't hide important information about who they are. How can you build a relationship with someone who's been pretending to be something he's not? Maybe he has reasons for being private about his work. Maybe he wanted me to know him as a person before judging him based on his income, or maybe he's been slumming it with the poor artist for entertainment. Sarah, men like this don't marry women like you. They have fun with you until they're ready to settle down with someone from their own social class. Her words hit like a physical blow, confirming every insecurity I'd been fighting since discovering his portfolio. The fear that I was a temporary diversion, a break from his real life among wealthy clients and charity galas. You don't know anything about Alex or what kind of person he is, I said, but my voice lacked conviction. I know he's been lying to you for 6 months. I know he let you struggle financially while sitting on millions. I know he brought you to meet our family while hiding his real circumstances. What does that tell you about his character? After we hung up, I sat surrounded by the printed articles, seeing Alex's professional success through my mother's suspicious lens. Every photo, every mention of exclusive services and high-profile clients. Every detail about his actual career felt like evidence of deception. But there was something else mixed in with my hurt and confusion, a growing understanding of why my mother had done this research in the first place. She hadn't been trying to protect me from Alex's inadequacy, she'd been investigating whether he was adequate enough. Her hostility at dinner had transformed into calculating interest the moment she'd discovered his real financial status. The printed articles weren't just evidence of Alex's concealed wealth, they were proof of my mother's values, her belief that money was the most important factor in evaluating a potential partner. She'd gone from dismissing Alex as unsuitable to viewing him as a prize worth pursuing, based entirely on information she'd found online. I realized I was angry at both of them, Alex for his careful omissions, and my mother for reducing our relationship to a financial transaction worth investigating. But I was angriest at myself for feeling relieved, somewhere underneath the hurt and confusion, that Alex was successful enough to meet my mother's approval. The phone bill would later show that my mother called me 7 times in 2 days, each conversation longer than the last. But it was the second call that changed everything, the one where her voice carried a completely different tone than the suspicious interrogation of our previous conversation. Sarah, honey, I've been thinking about Alex. Her voice was warm, almost breathless with excitement. I may have been too quick to judge him. I was sitting on my fire escape, watering the lavender plants Alex had given me months earlier. They were thriving now, filling the small space with their gentle fragrance. The peaceful routine felt incongruous with my mother's sudden enthusiasm. What changed your mind? I asked, though I suspected I already knew. Well, I did a little more research, and I have to say, I'm impressed. Very impressed. Do you know that his company manages portfolios for some of the most prominent families in the city? I saw an article about a charity auction where he donated $5,000, 5,000, like it was nothing. There it was. The complete reversal I'd been dreading since receiving her package of printed articles. My mother had gone from viewing Alex as an unsuitable partner to seeing him as a catch worth pursuing, based entirely on discovering his financial success. I thought you were concerned about his honesty, I said carefully. Oh well, I can understand why someone in his position might be discreet about their success. Wealthy people have to be careful about gold diggers and people with ulterior motives. He was probably just being cautious. The irony was breathtaking. The same caution she'd criticized as deception was now reframed as prudent discretion. The same vagueness about his work that had concerned her was now evidence of appropriate professional boundaries. Maybe we should have him over for dinner again, she continued. I'd like a chance to make a better impression. I think I came across as a bit harsh last time. A bit harsh was a generous description of her behavior at our family dinner. She'd spent the evening questioning his suitability and subtly undermining both of us, but apparently discovering his net worth had transformed that interrogation into a misunderstanding worth correcting. I don't think Alex is eager to repeat that experience, I said. Oh, I'm sure he understood. I was just being protective. Any mother would want to know about the man her daughter is serious about. And Sarah, you are serious about him, aren't you? Because a man like Alex probably has plenty of options. The comment stung because it revealed how my mother viewed my value in the relationship. In her assessment, I was lucky to have Alex's attention, not because of who I was, but because of what he could provide. The subtext was clear. I should be grateful for his interest and work to keep it. We haven't talked about anything long-term, I said honestly. Well, maybe it's time you did. You're 31, Sarah. You can't afford to let opportunities like this slip away. opportunities. That's how she saw Alex now, as a person I cared about, but as a chance for financial security that might not come again. The transactional nature of her thinking made me feel sick. I should go, I said. I have work to finish. Of course, honey. But think about what I said. And maybe mention to Alex that we'd love to have him over again. I'll make that salmon dish he mentioned liking. After we hung up, I sat among the lavender plants, trying to process this latest development. My mother's enthusiasm felt more threatening than her previous disapproval, at least when she'd been questioning Alex's suitability. Her concerns had been about our compatibility and his character. This new interest was purely mercenary, but there was something else bothering me about her sudden change of heart. If Alex was as successful and well-connected as the articles suggested, why was he dating me? My mother's comment about his options echoed my own insecurities. Successful men typically dated successful women. Wealthy men usually chose partners from similar backgrounds. Was I really naive enough to believe that Alex's interest in me was based purely on emotional connection? Or was my mother right to question why someone with his resources and social status would choose to build a relationship with a struggling freelance designer living in a studio apartment? The phone rang again, and I almost didn't answer it. But it was Alex, calling to check in about my day, something he did most evenings when we weren't together. "How was your afternoon?" he asked, his voice warm and familiar. "Complicated," I said, watching the last light fade from the sky. "My mother called." "Ah, how is she?" "Very interested in having you over for dinner again." There was a pause, and I could hear him processing this information. "That's unexpected. She didn't seem particularly interested in my company last time. She's done some research on your work. Apparently, that's changed her perspective." Another pause, longer this time. When Alex spoke again, his voice was careful. "What kind of research?" "The kind that reveals how successful you actually are. The kind that mentions 50 million in client assets and charity galas." I heard him sigh, a sound that contained resignation and something that might have been relief. "I suppose we need to talk about that," he said. "The restaurant menu from Chez Laurent still makes me cringe when I think about that evening. My mother had insisted on properly welcoming Alex with dinner at the most expensive restaurant in town, a place where appetizers cost more than I typically spent on groceries for a week. She'd made reservations for 6 people without consulting anyone, then spent 3 days calling to coordinate schedules and outfit choices. "I want Alex to see that our family knows how to appreciate the finer things," she'd told me during one of her planning calls. "First impressions matter, and I'm afraid our last dinner didn't represent us well." What she meant was that she wanted to demonstrate our worthiness as potential in-laws to someone she now viewed as a valuable connection. The transformation in her attitude was so complete and transparent that I felt embarrassed for both of us. Alex arrived at my apartment an hour before the reservation, wearing a navy blazer that looked expensive but understated. He'd been quiet since our phone conversation about my mother's research, and there was a tension between us that hadn't existed before her articles had exposed his real circumstances. "You look beautiful," he said when I opened the door, but his smile seemed strained. "You don't have to do this," I said. "We could still cancel. It's fine. Your mother went to a lot of trouble to arrange this." That was exactly the problem. My mother's sudden investment in our relationship felt manipulative and calculating, but Alex was too polite to acknowledge the obvious motive behind her change of heart. The restaurant was exactly as pretentious as I'd expected. White tablecloths, crystal stemware, and a sommelier who approached our table with the reverence usually reserved for religious ceremonies. My mother had dressed for the occasion in her best jewelry and a dress she'd probably purchased specifically for this dinner. "Alex, you look wonderful," she gushed when we arrived. "That jacket is beautiful. Italian." I wanted to disappear into the floor. My mother, who typically shopped at department store sales and considered Olive Garden an expensive dinner out, was suddenly playing the role of someone comfortable with luxury. She'd clearly researched not just Alex's professional success, but also the lifestyle markers that supposedly accompanied wealth. "I'm not sure where it's from," Alex replied diplomatically. "I don't pay much attention to labels." "Oh, of course, true quality speaks for itself." My father looked as uncomfortable as I felt, while Jennifer and Mark seemed fascinated by this version of my mother they'd never seen before. She'd transformed from the practical, frugal woman who'd raised us into someone performing sophistication and refinement. The performance continued throughout dinner. My mother asked Alex about his investment philosophy and nodded knowingly at his responses. She mentioned having read about portfolio diversification strategies in a financial magazine. She casually dropped references to luxury brands and exclusive restaurants, as if these were normal topics of conversation in our family. Sarah mentioned you attended the Children's Hospital Gala last month, she said while examining the wine list with theatrical concentration. Such an important cause. We've always believed in supporting community charities. This was news to me. Our family's charitable contributions typically consisted of dropping spare change into collection buckets at grocery stores, but apparently my mother had researched the social circuit Alex moved in and was positioning our family as fellow philanthropists. The work they do is remarkable, Alex agreed, though I have to admit, I find the formal events less meaningful than direct service opportunities. Oh, absolutely. We feel the same way, don't we, Sarah? I nodded mutely, mortified by her transparent attempts to align our family values with whatever she imagined Alex's priorities to be. The most excruciating moment came when she insisted on ordering wine that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Alex, you must recommend something. I'm sure you have exquisite taste in wines. I'm happy with whatever you'd prefer, Alex said, but my mother persisted until he suggested a bottle that made my father's eyes widen when he saw the price on the menu. Throughout the meal, I watched Alex's face for signs of judgment or amusement, but he maintained perfect politeness even as my mother's performance became increasingly obvious. He answered her questions about his work without revealing much, deflected her attempts to extract information about his personal wealth, and somehow managed to include my father and siblings in conversations that my mother kept trying to monopolize. But I could see the toll it was taking. The easy warmth that usually characterized Alex's interactions with people was replaced by careful diplomacy. He was being polite to my family, but there was a distance in his manner that hadn't been there during our first disastrous dinner. We should do this more often, my mother announced as we waited for dessert. It's so important for families to spend quality time together, especially when someone special is becoming part of the family. Alex's hand tightened almost imperceptibly around his wineglass. We'd never discussed becoming part of each other's families, and my mother's presumption hung in the air like an unwelcome invitation. This has been lovely, Alex said carefully. Thank you for arranging such a nice evening. The dinner finally ended after 3 hours of my mother's performance and my growing mortification. Alex insisted on paying for the entire table despite my parents' theatrical protests, a gesture that probably confirmed every suspicion my mother had about his financial resources. Walking back to the car, I felt the weight of the evening settling between Alex and me like a wall. My mother's obvious gold-digging behavior had exposed something ugly about my family dynamics, and I wasn't sure how to address it without making everything worse. I'm sorry about tonight, I said when we were alone in his car. Your mother was very enthusiastic, Alex replied diplomatically. She wasn't like this before she found out about your work. Alex nodded but didn't respond immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was tired. This is why I'm careful about discussing my finances early in relationships. It changes everything. He was right, and we both knew it. My mother's research had transformed our relationship from something organic and private into something that felt scrutinized and commodified. The easy intimacy we'd built over months was now shadowed by external pressures and expectations that neither of us had invited. The text message screenshot would become evidence of everything I'd suspected but hoped wasn't true. It arrived accidentally, sent to me instead of my sister Jennifer, with a timestamp showing it was composed just hours after our expensive dinner at Chez Laurent. Jennifer, you should have seen Alex tonight. The way he handled that wine list, and he paid for everything without blinking. Sarah has no idea how lucky she is. This man is worth millions. I looked up his company online. He manages portfolios for some of the wealthiest families in the state. If she plays her cards right, she'll never have to worry about money again. Finally, one of my daughters is going to land someone worthwhile. I read the message 3 times before its full meaning sank in. The casual cruelty of finally, one of my daughters is going to land someone worthwhile hit me like a physical blow. My mother had reduced my relationship with Alex to a financial transaction, and apparently she'd been discussing it with my sister as if I were a lottery ticket that had finally paid off. But it was the phrase, "if she plays her cards right," that made my hands shake as I held the phone. My mother wasn't just celebrating Alex's wealth, she was strategizing how I could leverage it. In her mind, I wasn't in love with a man who happened to be successful. I was a woman with an opportunity to secure her financial future, and my job was to capitalize on that opportunity effectively. The text had been sent at 11:47 p.m., which meant my mother had been calculating Alex's net worth and my romantic prospects while we were still driving home from dinner. While I'd been feeling mortified by her performance, she'd been feeling victorious about her successful investigation. I called her immediately, my anger overriding any impulse toward diplomatic confrontation. "Sarah, is everything okay? It's almost midnight. I got your text message." Silence. Then, "What text message?" "The one meant for Jennifer. About Alex being worth millions and me finally landing someone worthwhile." More silence, followed by the sound of my mother clearly scrambling to figure out how to handle being caught. When she spoke again, her voice was defensive rather than apologetic. "Sarah, I was just excited for you. You have to understand. After David and all the struggles you've had, all the struggles I've had." "You mean the struggles you've been criticizing me for having? The struggles that made me an embarrassment to the family?" "That's not what I meant. I just think you deserve security, happiness. Alex can provide that." "Alex isn't a retirement plan, Mom. He's a person I care about." "Of course he is. But honey, you can't ignore the practical benefits. You're 31 years old, and you've been living paycheck to paycheck for months. This is your chance to build a real future." The conversation continued for 20 more minutes, with my mother alternating between denial and justification. She insisted that her enthusiasm about Alex's wealth was secondary to her happiness about our relationship, but every example she gave contradicted that claim. She was thrilled that he could take care of me, excited that I'd never have to worry about money again, proud that I'd found someone who could provide real security. Not once did she mention anything about Alex's character, our compatibility, or whether we made each other happy. Her entire focus was on what he could do for me financially, as if love and companionship were luxury items that only became relevant once economic needs were met. "You raised me to be independent," I said finally, "to take care of myself and make my own choices. Now you're acting like my worth is determined by who I marry and how much money they have. I raised you to be practical, and the practical reality is that life is easier when you don't have to struggle financially. You've tried the independent route, Sarah. Look where it's gotten you." That phrase, "look where it's gotten you," crystallized everything wrong with my mother's perspective. In her assessment, my divorce from David and my subsequent efforts to build a freelance business represented failure rather than courage. My struggle to create authentic happiness was evidence of poor judgment rather than admirable self-determination. "Where it's gotten me is to a place where I'm genuinely happy," I said. "Where I'm doing work I love with someone who sees me as a whole person, not just a financial dependent waiting to happen." And what happens when he gets bored with playing house with the struggling artist? Men like Alex don't marry women like you, Sarah. They have fun with you until they're ready for someone from their own social class. The cruelty of that observation was stunning, partly because it echoed my own deepest fears. My mother had identified my greatest insecurity and wielded it as a weapon to convince me to view Alex as a financial opportunity rather than a romantic partner. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment surrounded by all the evidence of the life I'd built since my divorce, the furniture I'd bought piece by piece, the art supplies that represented my professional dreams, the small but meaningful improvements I'd made to create a space that felt like home. None of it was impressive by conventional standards. My studio apartment was still tiny, my income was still unpredictable, and my future was still uncertain. But it was mine, built through my own choices and efforts. My mother's text message had revealed the extent to which she viewed that independence as a failure worth abandoning for financial security. But it had also revealed something else, her complete inability to understand what actually made me happy. The question now was whether I could protect what Alex and I had built together from the toxic influence of my family's mercenary expectations. Recorded the conversation on my phone, though I didn't plan to at first. But something about the way my mother answered the door with that bright, calculating smile she'd worn throughout dinner at Chez Laurent made me realize I needed documentation of what was about to happen. Her version of events and my version had become so different that I needed proof of the actual words being spoken. "Sarah, what a lovely surprise. Come in, come in." I was just thinking about you and Alex. Of course, she was. In the 3 days since her accidental text message, she'd called twice and left voicemails about clarifying our conversation and making sure there weren't any misunderstandings. I'd ignored both calls, needing time to prepare for this confrontation. We need to talk about your text message, I said, declining her offer to come inside, and about the way you've been treating my relationship with Alex. Oh, honey, I think you misunderstood what I was trying to say. I was just excited for you, that's all. Sometimes mothers get carried away when they see their daughters happy. The word happy coming from her felt like mockery. She'd shown no interest in whether Alex made me happy until she'd discovered his financial status. Her excitement was about his portfolio, not my emotional well-being. You said I'd finally landed someone worthwhile. You said I should play my cards right so I'd never have to worry about money again. You talked about me like I was running a con game. That's not how I meant it. But her denial lacked conviction, and she kept glancing around as if checking whether the neighbors might overhear our conversation. Then, how did you mean it? Because from where I'm standing, it sounds like you think my relationship is a business transaction. My mother sighed and opened the door wider, gesturing for me to come inside. Let's not discuss this on the front porch. Come in, and we'll talk properly. I stepped into the living room where I'd grown up, surrounded by family photos, and the same furniture my parents had owned for 20 years. Everything looked smaller than I remembered, shabbier somehow, which made me wonder if my mother's sudden interest in luxury was partly about her own insecurity regarding our family's modest circumstances. Sarah, sit down. You're overreacting to something that was meant to be supportive. Supportive of what? My happiness or my bank account? They're not mutually exclusive. You can be happy and financially secure. In fact, it's easier to be happy when you're not constantly worried about making rent. There it was, the core of her philosophy laid bare. In my mother's worldview, emotional fulfillment was a luxury that became possible only after economic needs were met. Love was secondary to security. Compatibility was less important than financial stability. I wasn't constantly worried about making rent until you started constantly reminding me that I should be worried about making rent. I was trying to help you be realistic about your future. You're not 25 anymore, Sarah. You can't support yourself on graphic design projects forever. Why not? I'm building a business. I'm getting better clients, higher paying projects. My work is actually starting to pay off. And what happens when you want children? When you need health insurance that doesn't cost more than your rent? When you want to buy a house or save for retirement? Alex could provide all of that. Alex isn't an insurance policy. He's a person I care about who happens to care about me, too. My mother's expression shifted, becoming more calculating. And how long do you think that will last when he realizes you're never going to be his financial equal? Men like Alex marry women who can contribute to their lifestyle, not women who need to be supported. You don't know anything about what Alex wants or needs. I know enough. I know he's successful and well-connected and could have his pick of accomplished women. I know you've been lucky to keep his attention this long, but luck runs out. The cruelty of her assessment was breathtaking, but it was also revealing. My mother wasn't just expressing practical concerns about financial security. She was expressing her fundamental belief that I wasn't good enough for Alex based on my income and social status. Do you hear yourself right now? You're my mother. You're supposed to believe I'm worthy of love and respect regardless of how much money I make. Of course you're worthy of love. But relationships aren't just about love, Sarah. They're about compatibility, shared goals, similar backgrounds. You and Alex come from different worlds. We come from different tax brackets. That's not the same thing as different worlds, isn't it? Look around this room. Look at the restaurant where we took him to dinner. Do you think this is the kind of environment Alex is used to? Do you think he's comfortable here? I glanced around the modest living room, seeing it through my mother's newly critical eyes, the dated furniture, the generic artwork, the careful economies that had shaped my childhood. It was comfortable and familiar, but it wasn't impressive by any conventional measure of success. If Alex cared about any of that, he wouldn't be with me. Maybe he doesn't care now, when it's new and exciting. But what about when the novelty wears off? What about when he wants to introduce you to his wealthy friends and clients? What about when he realizes you'll never fit into his social circle? Every question hit like a targeted arrow, aimed at insecurities I'd been fighting since discovering Alex's real circumstances. My mother had identified every doubt I'd had about our relationship and was systematically reinforcing them. "This conversation is over," I said, standing up to leave. "Sarah, wait. I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm trying to prepare you for reality. I want you to be smart about this opportunity. There's no opportunity here. There's just a relationship between two people who care about each other. If you can't understand that, then maybe we need to take a break from each other. Don't be dramatic. I'm your mother. I'm trying to look out for your best interests. No, you're trying to live vicariously through what you think my relationship could become. You want Alex's money to solve problems. You think I have problems that matter more to you than they do to me." I was almost to the door when she played her final card. "Your father lost his job last month. We're behind on the mortgage payments. I thought maybe if you and Alex got serious, if he became part of the family, he might be able to help us out, just temporarily, until your father finds work again." The admission hung in the air like a confession. All of her sudden interest in Alex, all of her enthusiasm about our relationship, all of her strategic planning had been leading to this. The hope that my boyfriend's wealth could solve my parents' financial problems. "How much do you owe?" I asked quietly. "It's not your problem to solve, but it could be Alex's, if you handle this right." I turned around and looked at my mother, really looked at her hand, saw desperation beneath her manipulative calculations. She was scared about their financial future and had seized on Alex as a potential solution. But instead of asking for help directly, she'd tried to orchestrate a relationship outcome that would serve her purposes. "You should have just asked me for help instead of treating my relationship like a business opportunity. How could you help? You can barely support yourself." The truth of that observation stung, but it also clarified something important. My mother's lack of faith in my ability to help them had led her to view Alex as their salvation rather than my partner. She'd reduced our relationship to its potential financial benefits because she couldn't imagine any other way. I might be valuable to my own family. I left without saying goodbye, carrying the weight of everything that had been revealed in that conversation. My mother's desperation, her manipulation, and her fundamental belief that my worth was determined by my economic utility, rather than my character or choices. The tissue box sat between us on Alex's coffee table, a simple white cube that had become essential equipment for the conversation we'd been avoiding for weeks. I'd driven straight to his apartment after confronting my mother, arriving tear-streaked and emotionally raw, carrying the weight of everything I'd learned about my family's expectations and my own value in their eyes. "She wanted you to solve their financial problems," I said for the third time, still struggling to believe my mother's admission. "Not me, you." She was planning our relationship around their mortgage payments. Alex handed me another tissue, his expression a mixture of sadness and something that looked like recognition, as if this wasn't the first time he'd encountered this particular form of manipulation. "People do strange things when they're scared about money," he said quietly. "It doesn't excuse what she did, but desperation makes people act in ways they wouldn't normally consider. You're being too generous." She wasn't desperate when she started researching your background. She was curious. The desperation only explained her final confession, not months of treating our relationship like a business venture. I'd told him everything: the printed articles, the phone calls, the expensive dinner where she'd performed sophistication and philanthropy, the accidental text message that had revealed her real thoughts. Each detail felt like a betrayal, not just of my trust, but of the authentic connection Alex and I had built. "I keep thinking about what she said about men like you not marrying women like me," I continued, dabbing at my eyes with tissue that was rapidly disintegrating. "About you getting bored when the novelty wears off, Sarah." Alex's voice was firm enough to make me look up at him. "Your mother doesn't know anything about men like me because she doesn't know anything about me. She's never bothered to learn who I actually am. But she's not wrong about the financial differences between us. You manage millions of dollars for wealthy clients. You attend charity galas. You live in a completely different economic reality than I do." Alex was quiet for a moment, considering his response with the same careful attention he brought to everything important. When he spoke, his voice was gentle but serious. "You're right that we have different financial circumstances, but you're wrong about what that means for our relationship." He reached across the coffee table and took my hands, still slightly damp from tears and tissue. "I've dated women who shared my financial circumstances. Women from similar backgrounds, with similar careers and social connections. You know what those relationships had in common. They felt like mergers rather than partnerships. Everything was calculated: compatible investment strategies, shared social circles, family approval. Very practical, very logical, and completely soulless. I wanted to believe him, but my mother's warnings echoed in my mind. But eventually you'll want someone who can contribute equally, someone who fits into your professional world. I want someone who challenges me to be a better person, someone who creates beautiful things and follows her passion, even when it's difficult, someone who chose independence over security and authenticity over approval. I want someone exactly like you. The sincerity in his voice made me cry harder, but these tears felt different, less about grief and more about relief. For weeks I'd been afraid that discovering his wealth would change everything between us, and it had, but not in the way I'd expected. I was terrified that you'd been slumming it with the poor artist, I admitted. That our relationship was some kind of temporary adventure before you returned to your real life. This is my real life. You are my real life. Everything else is just work. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, Alex's presence steadying me in a way that felt both familiar and precious. He didn't try to fix my family situation or offer solutions to problems that weren't his to solve. He simply held space for my feelings and offered the reassurance I needed to hear. What happens now? I asked eventually. With your family, I mean, your mother isn't going to give up on her vision of what our relationship should become. I think I need to establish some boundaries. Make it clear that our relationship isn't a family investment opportunity and that her interference isn't welcome. That won't be easy. She's not good at accepting boundaries. Then she'll have to learn. The alternative is letting her manipulate our relationship until there's nothing authentic left to protect. Alex pulled me closer, and I settled against his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne, mixed with the lavender from the plants he'd given me months ago. The simple comfort of being held by someone who truly knew me felt like the most valuable thing in the world. More valuable than any financial security my mother thought I should pursue. I love you, I said quietly, the words feeling both inevitable and surprising. I love you too, he replied without hesitation. I have 4 months. I was just waiting for the right moment to say it. This feels like the right moment. After everything that's happened, after all the confusion and manipulation, this feels like the most honest thing I've said in weeks. Alex kissed the top of my head, a gesture so tender it made my chest ache with gratitude. Your mother's schemes don't define us. Her expectations don't determine our future. What we build together is ours to decide. The tissue box was nearly empty by the time we finished talking, but something had shifted between us. The external pressures and hidden information that had created distance were finally out in the open, and we could begin rebuilding our relationship on a foundation of complete honesty. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe fully. The blocked number screenshot on my phone became a symbol of the most difficult decision I'd ever made regarding family. My mother's contact information, grayed out and marked with a small blocked icon, represented months of escalating manipulation that had finally pushed me past my breaking point. The decision came after her 15th call in 3 days, each voicemail more desperate and manipulative than the last. She'd moved through the complete cycle of emotional manipulation, anger that I was throwing away the best thing that ever happened to me, guilt about abandoning family during their financial crisis, bargaining with promises to stay out of my personal life, and finally threats about what would happen when Alex inevitably left me for someone more suitable. Sarah, this is ridiculous, her final voicemail had said. You're going to lose Alex over this silly fight, and then you'll realize I was only trying to help. Call me back before you ruin everything good in your life. The assumption that my relationship with Alex was so fragile it couldn't survive my setting boundaries with my family revealed everything wrong with my mother's perspective. In her mind, my value as a partner was so minimal that any conflict or complication would cause him to leave. She couldn't conceive of a relationship strong enough to weather family drama, because she couldn't conceive of me as worthy enough to fight for. Blocking her number felt like severing a limb, drastic, but necessary to stop the infection from spreading. I'd never cut contact with family before, had always believed that blood relationships required endless forgiveness and accommodation. But my mother's behavior had crossed lines I hadn't even known existed. I called Jennifer to explain my decision before she heard about it from our parents. You blocked Mom's number. Her voice carried disbelief and concern in equal measure. Temporarily, until she can respect basic boundaries about my relationship. Sarah, She's just worried about you. You know how she gets when she thinks one of us is making a mistake. This isn't about her being worried. This is about her trying to orchestrate my relationship for her own benefit. She wants Alex to solve their financial problems, and she's willing to manipulate me to make that happen." Jennifer was quiet for a moment, processing this information. She'd witnessed our mother's transformation at the expensive dinner, seen the calculating enthusiasm that had replaced genuine concern. "I know she's been intense about Alex, but blocking her seems extreme. What would you do if she was treating Mark like a business opportunity? If she was strategizing how to leverage your marriage for financial gain? That's different. Mark and I have been married for 5 years. It's not different. Either my relationship deserves respect or it doesn't. Either my choices matter or they don't. I can't build a healthy future with Alex while my family is actively trying to undermine our foundation." The conversation with Jennifer was difficult, but necessary. I needed someone in my family to understand that this wasn't about rejecting help or being ungrateful for concern. This was about protecting something precious from people who saw it only in terms of its potential utility. Setting boundaries with my mother meant establishing new patterns in other relationships too. I stopped sharing details about my relationship with Alex during family conversations. I declined invitations to events where I knew she'd be present and waiting to ambush me with unsolicited advice. I began making decisions about my time and energy based on what served my well-being, rather than what avoided family conflict. The changes felt strange at first. I'd been trained since childhood to accommodate my mother's emotions, to manage her anxiety about my choices, to prioritize family harmony over personal boundaries. Learning to protect my own emotional space required constant vigilance and frequent reminders that I wasn't responsible for her feelings about my decisions. Alex supported my choice to limit contact, though he never pushed me toward any particular course of action. "Healthy relationships require healthy boundaries," he said when I worried that I was being too harsh. "You can't love people who refuse to respect basic limits." The relief that came with establishing those boundaries was unexpected and profound. Without my mother's constant commentary on our relationship, Alex and I could focus on building something authentic rather than defending something she'd never understood. We could make decisions based on our actual needs and desires rather than on managing external pressure and manipulation. But the boundaries also came with grief. I mourned the relationship I'd wanted with my mother, one based on genuine love and support rather than conditional approval and manipulation. I grieved the family dynamics I'd hoped we could eventually establish, where my choices were respected even when they weren't understood. 3 weeks after blocking her number, I received a letter in the mail. My mother's handwriting on expensive stationery, filled with apologies that felt strategic rather than sincere. She promised to respect my relationship with Alex, to stop interfering in my personal decisions, to support whatever choices made me happy. But buried in the apologies were the same underlying assumptions that had caused the problem in the first place. She was sorry for coming on too strong about Alex's financial success, but she still believed I was lucky to have found him. She regretted pushing too hard for family involvement, but she still thought our relationship could benefit from family support and guidance. I filed the letter away without responding. Real change would require more than strategic apologies designed to regain access to Alex and his potential assistants with their financial problems. Real change would require my mother to examine her fundamental beliefs about relationships, money, and my worth as a person. Until that happened, the boundaries would remain in place, protecting something beautiful from people who couldn't see its value beyond its practical applications. The Thanksgiving recipe card sits in my kitchen drawer now. Handwritten instructions for roasted vegetables and herb-crusted salmon that Alex and I developed together during our first holiday as a chosen family. The simple white index card represents everything my biological family had failed to provide: celebration based on gratitude rather than obligation, tradition built around joy rather than judgment. We'd made the decision in early November. After weeks of dreading the approaching holiday season, my mother had sent multiple messages through Jennifer, extending invitations that felt more like ultimatums. Family is family, the messages always concluded, as if biological connection trumped behavioral boundaries. "What do you want to do?" Alex had asked one evening as we discussed the mounting pressure to reconcile for the holidays. "I want to have Thanksgiving dinner with someone who actually appreciates what we're thankful for," I'd replied. instead of someone who's calculating how our relationship might benefit her mortgage payments. So we'd created our own celebration. Alex invited his colleague James and his wife Maria, a couple who'd become friends over the past few months. I invited Lisa, my friend from college who understood the complexities of family dysfunction. We gathered in Alex's apartment, which was large enough to accommodate a proper dinner party, and created exactly the kind of celebration I'd always wanted. The menu was collaborative rather than traditional. Instead of the heavy, obligatory dishes that had dominated my childhood Thanksgivings, we chose foods we actually enjoyed. The herb-crusted salmon was Alex's suggestion, the roasted vegetables were my contribution, and Maria brought homemade bread that filled the apartment with warmth and comfort. The conversation around our table focused on genuine gratitude rather than polite performance. James talked about a difficult client who'd become a friend. Maria shared her excitement about starting graduate school. Lisa discussed her recent promotion and new apartment. Alex and I reflected on the growth in our relationship, the challenges we'd overcome, and the future we were building together. There was no undercurrent of judgment or manipulation, no careful navigation of sensitive topics, no performance of gratitude for things we didn't actually value. We could be authentically ourselves without worrying about managing anyone else's expectations or emotions. This feels like what holidays are supposed to feel like, I told Alex later as we cleaned dishes together, like celebration instead of endurance. We can make all our holidays feel like this, he replied. We get to decide what traditions matter to us. The concept of chosen family had always seemed abstract to me before that Thanksgiving. I'd understood it intellectually, the idea that meaningful relationships could be built with people who weren't biologically related, but I'd never experienced the profound relief of belonging somewhere without conditions or complications. Creating new traditions with Alex felt like reclaiming ownership of my own happiness. Instead of dreading family gatherings because of the criticism and manipulation they typically involved, I could look forward to celebrations that actually celebrated the things I valued. We established new patterns for other holidays too. Christmas became about giving meaningful gifts rather than expensive obligations. We exchanged books we thought the other would enjoy. Small items that reflected genuine attention to each other's interests and needs. Valentine's Day became about cooking together rather than expensive restaurants. Easter became about hiking and spending time outdoors rather than formal family dinners. Each new tradition felt like another step away from the toxic dynamics that had shaped my understanding of relationships and toward something healthier and more authentic. Alex and I could focus on what actually brought us joy rather than what satisfied external expectations. The freedom to create our own traditions also extended to everyday patterns. We could spend Sunday mornings reading together without worrying about missing church services that held no meaning for either of us. We could plan vacations based on places we wanted to explore rather than family obligations we needed to fulfill. We could make decisions about our time and energy based on what served our relationship rather than what avoided family conflict. But perhaps most importantly, we could define success in our relationship by our own standards rather than by other people's metrics. My mother had measured relationships by financial security and social status. Alex and I measured ours by emotional intimacy, mutual support, and genuine happiness. The recipe card in my drawer represents that shift from tradition based on obligation to tradition based on choice. Every time I use those instructions to recreate our first Thanksgiving together, I remember the relief of celebrating with people who genuinely wanted to be there, who appreciated what we were building together, and who understood that the most meaningful traditions are the ones we create for ourselves. Building a chosen family with Alex taught me that belonging doesn't require blood, relationships, or family approval. It requires people who see your worth, respect your choices, and choose to celebrate your happiness rather than complicate it. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I belonged somewhere without having to earn or maintain that belonging through perfect behavior or strategic choices. The wedding invitation to my cousin's anniversary party arrived exactly 1 year after the disastrous family dinner that had started everything. The cream-colored cardstock and elegant script felt like a test would I attend the same kind of family gathering where my mother had once called my divorce embarrassing, now that everything had changed between us. Alex found me staring at the invitation over my morning coffee, lost in memories of standing in a borrowed dress while my mother whispered about my failures to anyone who would listen. Thinking about going, he asked, settling into the chair across from me with his own coffee. I'm thinking about how different everything is now. A year ago, I felt like the family disappointment. Now I'm wondering if I want to subject myself to their judgment again, even though I'm in a completely different place. The past year had transformed both my circumstances and my confidence. My graphic design business was thriving, with regular clients and projects that challenged and excited me. Alex and I had moved in together, sharing a beautiful apartment that felt like home in ways my studio never had. I'd learned to set boundaries with my family and to prioritize my own well-being over their expectations. But family gatherings still felt like walking into a minefield. Even with my newfound stability, what would make it worth attending? Alex asked, understanding that this decision was about more than just a social obligation. Proving to myself that their opinions don't control my happiness anymore. Showing up as someone who's genuinely content instead of someone desperately seeking approval. I decided to attend, but on my own terms. I bought a new dress, not borrowed, not chosen to minimize attention, but something that made me feel confident and beautiful. I planned to stay for exactly 2 hours, long enough to be gracious, but short enough to avoid extended family interrogation, and I prepared responses to the questions I knew were coming about my relationship, my work, and my choices. The party was held at the same country club where my cousin's original wedding had taken place. Full of familiar faces and predictable conversations, but this time, I walked into the room feeling like I belonged there by choice rather than obligation. My mother approached within minutes of my arrival, wearing the same bright smile she'd perfected for social occasions, but with an edge of uncertainty I'd never seen before. "Sarah, you look wonderful. That dress is beautiful." "Thank you." I kept my tone polite but distant, maintaining the boundaries I'd established months earlier. "How are things? How's Alex? I was hoping he might come with you tonight." Alex had offered to attend, but I'd wanted to handle this solo. Proving to myself and my family that I could navigate these relationships independently felt important. "Alex is, well, he had other commitments tonight." My mother nodded, clearly hoping for more information but not quite brave enough to ask directly. The woman who had once felt entitled to details about every aspect of my life was now carefully testing whether she had permission to be curious. "Your father and I have been hoping we could all get together soon. Maybe have dinner, just family. No pressure, of course." The no pressure qualifier was new, a recognition that pressure had been part of the problem in our previous interactions, but I could hear the underlying hope in her voice, the desire to rebuild some kind of relationship without having to fully acknowledge what she'd done wrong. "I'll think about it," I replied, which was true. I was slowly considering what kind of relationship might be possible with my family, but only on terms that protected what Alex and I had built together. Throughout the evening, I found myself observing family dynamics with new clarity, the subtle competitions, the performative conversations about success and status, the way people measured their worth against each other's achievements. I'd grown up thinking this was normal, but a year of healthier relationships had shown me how toxic these patterns actually were. My aunt approached me near the dessert table, wine loosening her usual diplomatic restraint. "Sarah, I have to say, you seem so much happier than the last time I saw you. More confident, more settled." "I am happier. I've learned to focus on what actually matters to me, instead of what other people think should matter to me." "That's wonderful. Dia, and Alex seems like such a lovely man. Your mother speaks very highly of him now." The irony wasn't lost on me. My mother spoke highly of Alex now because she'd discovered his financial success, not because she'd developed any genuine appreciation for his character or our relationship. Her opinion of him had changed without her ever bothering to actually know him. "Alex is a good person," I said simply. As the evening continued, I realized something unexpected. I felt sorry for my family. Their focus on external validation and financial security had blinded them to so many forms of genuine happiness. They were still measuring success by metrics that had never brought me any real satisfaction. When it came time to leave, my mother walked me to the door. "Sarah, I know things have been difficult between us. I want you to know that I love you and I'm proud of you, regardless of everything else." It was the closest she'd come to acknowledging her manipulative behavior, though she still couldn't name it directly. The apology was incomplete, but it was a start. "I love you too, Mom. But love isn't enough if it comes with conditions and manipulation." I need relationships that respect my autonomy and support my happiness. I'm trying to understand that it might take me some time. That's okay. I have time, but I also have boundaries, and those aren't changing. Driving home, I felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with family reconciliation. I'd returned to the scene of one of my most humiliating moments and discovered that their approval no longer determined my self-worth. I could interact with my family without needing them to validate my choices. The invitation to my cousin's anniversary party had offered me a chance to measure my growth, and I'd discovered that I'd traveled much further than I'd realized, not just in terms of financial stability or relationship success, but in terms of understanding my own value and protecting my own happiness. I was finally free from the need to prove anything to people who had never been capable of seeing my worth in the first place. The new business cards arrived on a Tuesday morning, crisp white stock with elegant typography that reflected everything I'd learned about design and confidence over the past 18 months. Sarah Mitchell Design, visual identity for authentic brands, simple words that represented a complete transformation from the struggling freelancer who had once worried about affording groceries. Alex found me arranging them on my desk in our shared home office, a space that had evolved to accommodate both his investment consulting work and my growing design business. They look professional, he said, examining one of the cards. I like how the design reflects your aesthetic without being overly artistic. I learned that from all those early client meetings where I was told my work was too artistic. Now, I know how to balance creativity with commercial appeal. My business had grown beyond anything I'd imagined when I first started freelancing. What had begun as desperation-driven projects for local restaurants and small businesses had evolved into strategic brand development for companies that valued both creativity and results. I was finally earning enough to contribute equally to our household expenses, something that mattered more to me than Alex. You know, I never cared about the money, right? He said, reading my thoughts with the intuition that had developed between us over months of honest communication. I know, but I cared. I needed to prove to myself that I could build something sustainable on my own terms. The independence I'd fought for wasn't about rejecting help or partnership. It was about ensuring that my contributions to our relationship came from strength rather than need. I wanted to be with Alex because I chose him, not because I required his financial security. My phone rang, interrupting our conversation. My mother's name appeared on the screen, the first call I'd accepted from her in 3 months, since she'd finally agreed to respect the boundaries I'd established. Hi Mom, Sarah. I wanted to call and congratulate you on the article in Business Weekly. Jennifer showed me the piece about local entrepreneurs. I'm so proud of you. The article had been a surprise, featuring my design business as one of the region's rising creative agencies. The reporter had focused on my transition from corporate marriage to independent entrepreneurship, framing it as a story of personal and professional reinvention. Thank you. It was unexpected but good for business. I've been thinking about what you said at the anniversary party, about boundaries and respect. I want you to know that I'm working on understanding what that means. This was progress, though, slow and imperfect. My mother was gradually learning to engage with my life without trying to control or optimize it. She still didn't fully understand my choices, but she was beginning to accept that understanding wasn't required for basic respect. Appreciate that, Mom. It means a lot. Would you and Alex like to come for dinner sometime? Nothing fancy, just family dinner. I promised not to interrogate him about his investment strategies. I smiled at her attempt at humor, recognizing the effort it represented. I'll talk to Alex and let you know. After we hung up, Alex looked at me with curiosity. How was that better? She's learning that she can be part of my life without running it. It's slow progress, but it's progress. The relationship with my family would probably never be everything I'd once wanted it to be. Too much had been revealed about their values and priorities for us to return to naive closeness, but we were building something new, a relationship based on acceptance rather than approval, boundaries rather than manipulation. I got a call from David yesterday, I said, settling into the chair next to Alex's desk. That Alex raised an eyebrow. I rarely spoke to my ex-husband, and when I did, it was typically about finalizing some forgotten detail from our divorce. He's getting remarried. He wanted to tell me before I heard it from someone else. How do you feel about that? Happy for him, actually, and grateful that we both found relationships that actually work. He found someone who appreciates his 5-year plans and structured approach to life. I found someone who values creativity and emotional connection. The news of David's engagement had prompted unexpected reflection on how much my understanding of relationships had evolved. What I'd once interpreted as David's emotional distance, I now recognized as simple incompatibility. We'd both been trying to force a partnership that was fundamentally mismatched, staying together because leaving felt like failure rather than wisdom. I used to think the divorce was a sign that I was bad at relationships, I continued. Now, I realize it was a sign that I was finally getting good at recognizing what I actually needed. Alex moved from his desk to the couch where I was sitting, pulling me close in the comfortable intimacy that had become our evening routine. "You need now?" he asked, the question carrying both immediate and long-term meaning. "I need exactly this: partnership with someone who sees me clearly, supports my goals, and chooses me every day instead of just accepting me as a default option." "That's exactly what you have." 6 months later, Alex proposed during one of our Sunday morning coffee routines, presenting a ring that was beautiful without being ostentatious, valuable without being flashy. The proposal itself was private and personal, free from the performance and external pressure that had characterized so many other milestones in my life. "I want to build a life with you," he said simply, "not because of what we can provide for each other, but because of who we become when we're together." My mother's reaction to our engagement was enthusiastic but carefully respectful. She offered to help with wedding planning without attempting to take control. She suggested guest list additions without insisting on them. She was learning to celebrate my happiness without trying to optimize it for her own purposes. The wedding, when it happened, was exactly what Alex and I wanted: intimate, meaningful, and entirely our own. We exchanged vows that reflected our actual values rather than traditional expectations. We celebrated with people who genuinely supported our relationship rather than people obligated to attend. Standing in my new business office 6 months after the wedding, looking at business cards that represented professional success I'd built independently, I realized that my mother's original assessment had been completely wrong. My divorce hadn't been embossing, it had been the beginning of everything good in my life. I'd learned to choose happiness over approval, authenticity over security, and partnership over dependency. I'd discovered that my worth wasn't determined by other people's validation or financial circumstances. Most importantly, I'd learned that the most valuable things in life, love, respect, genuine connection, couldn't be strategized or manipulated into existence. They could only be built through honesty, courage, and the willingness to choose people who saw your value without needing to be convinced of it. The woman who had once felt embarrassed about choosing happiness was now grateful for every choice that had led her here.